thought my duty was to protect this city from the storm.
When I was younger, war was simple. Call of Duty taught me that bullets flew in straight lines towards the bad guys. Modern Warfare showed me that betrayal stings, but only for as long as it takes to reload. Black Ops whispered that sometimes good men do dark things, then handed me an achievement for my trouble. These games made me feel powerful, righteous, necessary. I was the soldier who never missed, the operator who always knew which door to breach, the hero who saved the world between dinner and homework, then woke up the next morning ready to save it again. But one game wasn't like the others. It didn't want me to win. It didn't want me to feel cool. It wanted me to understand something about myself. Something I'd been avoiding every time I squeezed a virtual trigger. It wanted me to suffer, and it succeeded. The screen flickers one final time. Dubai's skyline emerges from the digital noise. A city that shouldn't exist, buried beneath sand that shouldn't be there. Glass towers pierce through dunes like tombstones. The wind carries whispers of the dead. In the distance, barely visible through the storm, a figure walks towards the ruins. His uniform is tattered and stained. His weapon trembles in burned hands. His eyes are hollow caverns where humanity used to be. He still believes he's the hero. He has no idea what he's already become. The title fades as a sandstorm consumes everything. In the growing darkness, we hear only the wind and the distant echo of a man's voice, already hollow, already lost.
Gentlemen, welcome to Dubai.
I spent my childhood learning how to be a soldier. Not in any real sense. I was 12 years old, wielding a plastic controller instead of a rifle. But the lessons felt real enough. Modern Warfare 2 taught me that good soldiers follow orders, even when those orders hurt. Call of Duty Black Ops showed me that sometimes the mission matters more than the man. Medal of Honor whispered that sacrifice was noble, that death was meaningful, that every bullet fired in service of freedom was a prayer answered. These were interactive blockbusters, cinematic experiences designed to make me feel like the star of my own war movie. I rappelled over buildings in slow motion. I gunned down faceless enemies by the hundreds. I saved the world, earned my achievements, and went to bed feeling like I'd accomplished something meaningful. The formula was intoxicating in its simplicity. Point, shoot, save the day. Rinse and repeat until the credits rolled. Violence was cathartic. War was clean. Heroes were real, and I was one of them. I remember the first time a game tried to shock me. The airport massacre in Modern Warfare 2. I walked through that terminal watching civilians fall, finger hovering over the trigger, telling myself I was just following orders. The game didn't make me shoot, it gave me a choice. But it also made it clear that not shooting wasn't really an option if I wanted to see how the story ended. So I kept walking, kept watching, kept telling myself that this was just a game. Afterwards, I felt nothing. Maybe that should have been my first warning. These games flirted with moral complexity, but they never committed to it. They'd show me something horrible, then immediately reassure me that I was still the good guy. That it was necessary, that someone had to make the hard choices. But there was always something missing from these battlefields. Something the developer either couldn't capture or chose to ignore. The weight of consequence. The smell of burning flesh. The sound a man makes when he realizes he's about to die. The way guilt eats at you long after the adrenaline fades. I didn't know I was missing these things. I thought the emptiness I felt after each campaign was just the natural come down from an adrenaline rush. I thought the ease with which I pulled virtual triggers said nothing about who I was as a person. Violence was just mechanics, death was just numbers, and war was just entertainment. The games never asked uncomfortable questions. They never made me doubt my righteousness. They certainly never suggested that maybe, just maybe, the person holding the controller might be the real monster in the room. They were power fantasies dressed up as moral complexity, giving me permission to feel complicated about violence while never actually challenging my right to commit it. Then came Spec Ops: The Line. And for the first time, a military shooter didn't want me to feel powerful. It wanted me to feel complicit. It wanted me to understand that the ease with which I'd been pulling the trigger for years wasn't harmless. That every time I'd chosen to continue playing instead of stopping, I'd been making a choice about the kind of person I wanted to be. This wasn't some accident of development. Jaeger Development knew exactly what they were building. Lead writer Walt Williams had worked on BioShock, watching Ken Levine craft narratives that trusted players to think for themselves. Designer Corey Davis had lived through real sandstorms in Texas, understanding how nature could humble human arrogance in seconds. They weren't interested in making me feel like a hero. They wanted to make me question why I'd ever wanted to feel that way in the first place. The original pitch was rejected for being too futuristic, too safe, so they pivoted to something far more dangerous. A Heart of Darkness retelling set in a city swallowed by sand. They drew inspiration from Apocalypse Now, from real sandstorms that had engulfed Dubai during development, from the understanding that sometimes the most heroic thing you can do is admit you were never the hero to begin with. Publisher 2K Games could have played it safe, could have demanded another generic shooter with slightly better graphics and bigger explosions. Instead, they gave Jaeger an unprecedented mandate. Don't make fun, make art. So they did. They created a game that looked exactly like every other military shooter on the market. Same mechanics, same UI, same promise of empowerment through violence. But underneath that familiar skin, something far more sinister was growing. A question that would metastasize through every firefight, every decision, every corpse left in your wake. What if you're not the good guy? It wasn't trying to outdo Call of Duty. It was trying to dismantle it, to take everything it had learned about being a digital shooter and reveal the rot beneath the medals. To show me that the line between hero and monster isn't drawn by circumstance or orders or even intentions. It's drawn by choices. And every choice in Spec Ops The Line is designed to make you complicit in something unforgivable, to force you to confront the uncomfortable truth that you've been making these choices all along. You just never had to face the consequences before. This is a story of that dismantling, of how 3 soldiers walked into hell thinking they were rescuing angels, only to discover they'd brought the demons with them. Of how a simple reconnaissance mission became a descent into madness, so complete that by the end you can't tell where the game ends and your own capacity for evil begins. This is a story of a game that doesn't just question the nature of heroism, it questions me, and it questions you. And speaking of things that keep me questioning late at night, let's talk about sleep. In a world this loud and this bright, especially now with summer sunsets dragging on for hours, it's hard to shut everything out. I don't know about you, but I've had plenty of nights lying there, staring at the ceiling, wishing the world would just turn off for a while. That's why I started using today's sponsor, Manta Sleep. These aren't your typical flimsy masks that let in light or start feeling uncomfortable after 10 minutes. They're fully adjustable, incredibly soft, and designed to block out everything. The first time I put one on, it was like flipping a switch. Total blackout, pure silence. I loved it so much, I bought 4 more just to give to friends. Because if there's one thing we all deserve, it's proper rest. Sleep isn't a luxury, it's fuel for everything we care about. If you want to take back your sleep like I did, visit mantasleep.com and use code NOTSABER for 10% off. That's NOTSABER for 10% off. Join the pro-nap movement today and make deep restorative rest part of your arsenal, no matter how long the sun stays up.
Is John Conrad the greatest man I ever served with? Well, I don't know. There was this one time in Kabul when he dragged my bleeding carcass half a mile to an evac chopper.
The radio crackles to life somewhere in the endless expanse of sand and broken dreams. Static bleeds through speakers that shouldn't work anymore, carrying a voice that sounds like it's calling from the bottom of a grave.
This is Colonel John Conrad, United States Army. Evacuation of Dubai ended in complete failure. Death toll, too many.
Then silence. Always silence. Captain Martin Walker leads Delta Squad into this tomb of glass and steel, where skyscrapers pierce through dunes like the ribs of some massive buried beast. Dubai breathes in slow, dying gasps. American flags hanging limp in the suffocating heat. Sand cascading through broken windows like hourglasses counting down to nothing. This is where heroes come to die, though Walker doesn't know it yet. The mission feels clean, simple. Make contact with the damn 33rd Battalion, assess the situation, and then extract to beyond the storm wall so you can contact headquarters. Walker moves with the confidence of a man who's read his own legend. his voice cutting through the comms with military precision. He tells his men that they're here to help, Adams and Lugo. The words feel true in his mouth, they feel right. These are Delta operators, elite soldiers trained to do the impossible. They save people, they restore order. They are the good guys. Walker has served under Conrad before, in Kabul, where the colonel dragged his bleeding carcass half a mile to the evac chopper. The man's a fucking hero. Walker knows this. If anyone can bring order to this chaos, it's John Conrad. Now Delta is 800 yards out from the transmission point. Lugo keeps up his usual banter, joking about the sand getting places it shouldn't. But the tension laces every word. Adam warns they're moving through a designated no man's land, urging caution. Walker keeps them on task, voice sharp, professional, calm. He tells himself, it's just another op. That's how you survive places like this. You believe the mission is clean. At the canyon's edge, Delta rigs ropes and zip lines down into the skeletal remains of the city. Below, Dubai feels like a mausoleum. Broken billboards, shattered glass, the quiet echo of a place that was alive once. They spot a distress beacon near a burned out Humvee. No signs of life. Then Adams finds the body of a 33rd soldier dumped like refuge. Then a shout. Figures emerge, weapons raised. Refugees, emaciated, desperate, their voices sharp in a language Walker doesn't understand. Lugo tries to translate to calm them down, but tension breaks faster than glass under a boot heel. Automatic fire erupts. Delta takes cover behind a sand-choked bus as bullets chew through the metal. Walker barks orders, returning fire. This is the first time Walker pulls the trigger in Dubai. It won't be the last. When the last refugee falls, his body collapses in the dust like a discarded doll. Silence presses in, heavy and suffocating. Lugo mutters a joke to break the tension, but it dies in his throat when they hear more movement up ahead. Another group, another firefight. These firefights unfold like a recruiting commercial come to life. Enemies fall with satisfying thuds, cover feels solid. Your rifle kicks back with that familiar, reliable recoil. Walker gives orders and his men follow them without question because this is what they do, what they've always done. When refugees open fire from atop a sand-filled bus, Delta cuts them down with surgical efficiency. When a grenadier takes position behind a billboard, Lugo puts him down with a single well-placed shot that brings the entire structure crashing down. Walker congratulates his team, and means it. The debris settles with a satisfying crash, and for a moment, everything feels exactly as it should. They move through the ruins with practiced efficiency, checking corners, covering angles, maintaining proper spacing. The banter flows naturally. Lugo jokes about preferring beaches with a better sexy lady to dead body ratio. Adams' dry observations about their unconventional vacation destination. Walker keeps them focused but doesn't discourage the humor. It's good for morale, and morale is important in hostile territory. But even in these early moments, hairline cracks appear in the narrative. The bodies they step over aren't wearing enemy uniforms. They're civilians, survivors, the very people that they came here to save. When Walker kneels beside the first American soldier they find, the man's been executed, lined up against a wall and shot in the back of the head. This isn't combat, this is something else. Walker mutters about Kabul death squads, and something cold settles in his stomach. Civilians cower from Delta as much as they do from insurgents, their eyes reflecting something that looks disturbingly like recognition. When they find McPherson, a 33rd soldier being tortured by CIA agent Castavin, the entire mission shifts beneath their feet. This can't be a simple rescue operation anymore. These are Americans fighting Americans, and nobody seems to know why. Walker pushes these observations down, deeper and deeper, where they can't contaminate the mission, can't contaminate the story he's telling himself. There has to be an explanation. Conrad will have answers. Conrad always has answers. The deeper they penetrate into Dubai's buried districts, the more the architecture itself seems to conspire against them. Hotels sunk beneath sand dunes, their crystal chandeliers hanging over refugees huddled around makeshift fires. Shopping malls where civilians once browsed for luxuries now serve as battlegrounds between competing factions. The city's wealth has been perverted into a monument to human desperation, gold and silk curtains providing that backdrop for execution chambers. At first, it kind of feels like Uncharted in a desert storm. 3 ruggedly handsome operators cracking jokes and saving the day. Lugo keeps things light with his wisecracks about silk curtains and crystal chandeliers. Adams plays the straight man, grounding them with tactical assessments. Walker leads from the front, making the hard calls with the easy confidence of a man who knows he's on the right side of history. Then they start noticing the bodies, the silence between gunfights, the way the city starts to watch them with empty windows like dead eyes. The 33rd soldiers they encounter are Americans, fellow servicemen who should be allies, not enemies. When they open fire screaming about CIA agents and Grey Fox operations, Walker orders his men to return fire. These soldiers wear the same uniform Walker once wore with pride, carry the same weapons, follow the same tactical doctrine, but they're shooting to kill, and hesitation means death. Adams shouts that they're Delta Force, here to help, but the 33rd soldiers respond with accusations about CIA operations, forcing Delta into cover with automatic weapons fire. Lugo screams denials about being CIA, but bullets don't distinguish between truth and lies. Walker makes the call because someone has to make the call. He orders return fire and watches American soldiers cut down American soldiers in a buried shopping mall. When the smoke clears, Adams stares at the bodies scattered across the marble floor. He says quietly that those were soldiers, their own guys. Walker replies that it was self-defense, but his voice lacks conviction. Adams says it doesn't make him feel any better. Walker tells him it's not supposed to. But Walker can see it in his men's faces, the same doubt that's gnawing at his own certainty. This isn't how the story was supposed to go. Heroes don't gun down fellow soldiers in shopping malls. Heroes don't step over American corpses to complete their missions. Heroes have clean hands and clear consciences. The deeper they descend into Dubai's buried heart, the more the city reveals its true nature. This isn't a rescue mission, it's an archaeological dig through layers of failure and betrayal. Every level they drop takes them further from the clean narrative they started with, and deeper into something that defies easy characterization. Walker clings to the mission parameters because they're all he has left. Find Conrad, extract the 33rd, simple, clean, heroic. The Colonel will explain everything. He'll make sense of the chaos, restore order to the madness. That's what John Conrad does. He saves people. He saved Walker once in Kabul, when everything went to hell and most men would have left him behind. But with each passing hour, each body they step over, each choice that leads inevitably to violence, the mission becomes less about saving people and more about justifying why they came here in the first place. The weight of the M4 in Walker's hands grows heavier. The voices on the radio grow more distorted. The city itself seems to press down on them, like the lid of a coffin. When they finally spot the massive structure known as the gate, it doesn't rise like some glorious monument. It sprawls across the ruins like a scar, choked with wrecked vehicles, sandbags, and barricades, hastily assembled by desperate men. This isn't the grand entrance to salvation that Walker imagined. It's a choke point, a bottleneck of violence, where the damned 33rd made their stand. Walker tells himself they're close now, close to answers, close to redemption, close to becoming the heroes they set out to be. But he doesn't know it yet. Captain Martin Walker is already lost in the dark under those crumbling girders. He just hasn't admitted it to himself. The real horror isn't what they'll find beyond the gate. The real horror is what they'll have to do to get there, and how good it will feel when they finally pull the trigger.
This is what I face every day. My duty is to maintain order. Without it, we would have died long ago.
The mission wasn't clean anymore. Delta wasn't fighting insurgents now. They were fighting Americans, the 33rd, the damned battalion, entrenched in Dubai's carcass, like ticks buried under skin. Walker told himself they were traitors, war criminals, men who had abandoned their oath and slaughtered civilians to maintain control of a dying city. Believing that was easier than questioning why any of this was happening. Now Delta was pinned on a ridge overlooking a fortified compound. Barbed wire strangled every approach. Machine guns raked the streets with suppressive fire. Snipers stalked rooftops, rifles glinting in the merciless sun. RPG teams crouched behind wrecked vehicles, waiting for the first advance to chew to pieces. This wasn't a defensive line, it was a wall, and beyond it lay the gate. Beyond the gate, Comrade, answers, and redemption. But there was no way forward, not without doing something unthinkable. A battered crate lay half buried in the sand nearby. Walker pried it open to find rows of white phosphorus shells, their smooth metallic surfaces catching the sun. Weapons of last resort. He'd seen what they could do before, what they left behind, but this wasn't a choice anymore. Adams crouched by the laptop, silent but ready. Lugo hung back, his unease sharp enough to cut through the heat. He asked if they really needed to do this, if there was any other way. He'd seen what this chemical did, how it clung to skin, how it devoured flesh, until there was nothing left but bone. Walker's hands hovered over the targeting system. Thermal signatures lit up the screen. Clusters of heat where enemy soldiers manned the barricades. He told himself they were hostile, that every one of those red dots had chosen this fight. The first shell screamed into the air, leaving a delicate white trail behind it before bursting in the middle of the compound. A flower of fire bloomed across the sand, petals of white smoke curling outward, eating everything in their path. Walker adjusted his aim and fired again, and again. Each impact sent plumes of blinding chemical light into the sky. On the laptop screen, the thermal targets scattered and faded one by one, until nothing remained but silence and static. Adams reported the area cleared. The path was open. But as Delta descended into the compound, the Victory began to rot. The stench hit first, a thick metallic tang of burned meat and smoke that clung to their throats. Bodies littered the sand in twisted heaps. Some still moved, fingers clawed at the air, skin peeling in ragged sheets as the chemical fire continued its work. Walker kept his eyes forward. He told himself these were soldiers, combatants, that this was war. But then he saw the child, small enough to be carried in a mother's arms, flesh melted into her chest where she had tried, futilely, to shield him from the phosphorus rain. A family lay huddled together in the corner of a courtyard, their bodies fused into one grotesque sculpture. An old man knelt in the street, blackened hands frozen mid-prayer, as if begging the sky for mercy. 47 civilians, 47 lives incinerated in moments. Lugo stopped dead, staring at the carnage, his rifle slack in his hands. Adam's voice broke as he asked how this could have happened. There had been no camp marked on the satellite images. But Walker knew. Deep beneath the rationalizations, beneath the tactical justifications, he understood. The 33rd hadn't been fortifying a position. They had been protecting these people. Protecting them from him. Delta Force had become the very thing they swore to fight. Walker told his men to keep moving. What else could he say? The dead wouldn't rise because he felt sorry. The mission was all that mattered now. Lugo turned on him, voice thick with rage and disbelief, incredulous that they could just walk away from this. Walker's answer was calm, almost hollow. Reinforcements would arrive any second. He promised they would make the ones responsible pay. But it was a lie, and they all knew it. Lies were easier than truth, especially when the truth had melted faces and tiny shoes scattered across scorched sand. The 33rd soldiers who arrived moments later weren't faceless enemies anymore. They were Americans who had watched their countrymen commit atrocities. They screamed accusations as they charged. Murderer, butcherer. The words echoed off the canyon walls like a judgment from the gods. Walker gunned them down anyway. Stopping now would mean admitting what he'd become. The killing became easier after that. Or maybe Walker just stopped noticing how heavy the rifle felt in his hands. Delta pushed deeper into Dubai's corpse, moving like an execution squad through streets choked with sand and smoke. The mission wasn't about saving anyone anymore. Somewhere between the phosphorus and now, Walker had stopped being a rescuer and started hunting Conrad for his own reasons. Adams felt quiet, his words clipped and cold when he did speak. Lugo's usual humor had withered to nothing. He moved like a ghost, his rifle clutched too tightly, jaw grinding as he muttered under his breath. When Agent Riggs proposed stealing the city's water supply, condemning thousands to die of thirst, Walker agreed without hesitation. When the convoy crashed and Riggs lay crushed beneath burning metal, his body crushed and mangled, Walker stands over him in silence. The CIA agent begs for a merciful end, his voice a hoarse rasp. But Walker doesn't pull the trigger. He fires one round into the sand beside Riggs' head, and walks away without looking back, leaving the man to choke on dust and his own blood. Dubai burned around them now. Buildings crumbled under the weight of sand, corpses piled high in the streets, indistinguishable from the debris. The radio played cheerful jazz music whilst announcing that the city would run out of water in 4 days, just as Riggs had planned. They finally reached the source of the voice that had been taunting them for hours. The radio man's tower stood like a skeletal finger pointing into the bruised sky. Inside, expensive broadcasting equipment glowed faintly as a man leaned over a microphone, filling the city's silence with jokes and jeers. They fought their way through what felt like the last of the 33rd's resistance, cutting a bloody path along rooftops and finally into the Radio Man's tower. The soldiers here weren't fanatics. They fought like men who knew they'd already lost, holding their ground out of habit rather than conviction. At the top of the tower was Darden, the man they'd come to know only as the Radio Man. Once a Rolling Stone journalist who covered celebrity gossip, he had embedded with the 33rd in Afghanistan, riding Conrad's coattails to a serious byline. He came to Dubai to write about the evacuation and stayed when the city became a tomb. Somewhere along the line, he became the voice of Dubai, the man behind the speakers littered throughout the streets, cracking jokes and spreading propaganda like poison gas. Darden had seen too much over 6 months. The elite sabotaging evacuations to save themselves, aid workers shot and buried in the sand. Conrad's martial law crushing whatever hope remained. But when they found him, Lugo didn't wait for orders. He fired rounds into the man before he could even finish his sentence. The body crumpled over the console, the microphone still keyed so that his death rattle carried across Dubai one last time. It should have felt like justice, but instead it felt like crushing a spider. Necessary maybe, but far from heroic. He wasn't even a soldier. Walker keyed the mic himself, broadcasting to anyone still alive that an American evacuation force was en route, that they would be saved. The words tasted like ash in his mouth, but he said them anyway. Conrad's voice answered over the speakers. Calm, final. He said he was sorry that it had to end this way. Then the helicopters arrived. It was here, someplace between the death of the Radio Man and the White Phosphorus, that Walker realized there was no evacuation force, there was no rescue. There was only him, Adams, and Lugo. But after the helicopters arrived, Delta managed to steal one of the 33rd's helicopter and circled the tower. Walker gripped the minigun, his finger squeezing the trigger until the weapon screamed. Bullets tore through the broadcasting equipment, the generators, the very foundations of the structure. The tower collapsed in slow motion. Steel, glass, and concrete tumbling into the sand like a monument to failure and madness. But then the roar of enemy helicopters swallowed the sound. This dogfight felt familiar. Too familiar. Another helicopter battle over Dubai, another sandstorm approaching. Walker's hands tightened on the controls. The same patterns repeated, the same maneuvers, the same radio chatters, the same explosions spiraling out of the sky. A sickening deja vu crawled through his mind like a parasite. This was the same helicopter gunfight that started at the start of the story, that we experienced in media res before the game transitioned to the start. He muttered under his breath that this wasn't right, somewhat aware, somewhat breaking the fourth wall, but the storm was already upon them. The sand swallowed the gunship hull. When he woke, the wreckage smoldered around him. The sky above was choked with dust and ash. Corpses lay half buried in the sand. Shapes moved in the periphery of his vision. Ghosts, maybe, or memories. He stumbled forward until he found Adams crouched behind a collapsed wall. Rifle raised, eyes scanning the shadows. There was no warmth in Adams' face anymore, only the cold calculation of a man with nothing left to lose. They didn't speak. There was no need. Then they heard a distress call from Lugo. They found him in the refugee camp. His body swung from a rope tied to a streetlight, swaying gently in the hot wind. The civilians that were arranged below him scattered at the sight of Delta's approach, but not before Walker saw the hatred in their eyes. Hatred like the kind he'd seen in Kabul, in Afghanistan, and every place American soldiers had tried to play savior and ended up as conquerors. Adams gripped his rifle so tightly his knuckles turned white. His voice was low, dangerous. He asked for permission to fire on the civilians, to burn the whole camp to the ground for what they had done. Walker didn't answer. He could feel the same rage rising in his own chest, that old familiar heat that made pulling the trigger feel like justice. These people had killed his man, his friend, his responsibility. Walker raised his weapon and prepared to become the villain one last time.
Hugo!
You out of your fucking mind?
You left me to die!
The tower rises from Dubai's corpse, like a monument to human failure. its windows dark except for the illumination at its base from the fountain outside. Walker climbs through the city's arteries alone now. Adam sacrificed himself at the bridge in a blaze of gunfire and bitter recrimination, choosing to die fighting rather than follow Walker any deeper into madness. Adams had screamed that the mission was over as 33rd soldiers closed in around them, that they had failed. Walker replied that it wasn't over whilst he still drew breath, and watched his last friend push him over the barricade before opening fire on an entire battalion. Now there's only silence. Walker steps through the tower's glass doors, boots clicking against polished marble floors that don't belong in a city buried under sand and death. The air is still, unnaturally clean, as if the building itself has been hermetically sealed off from the chaos outside. He wanders briefly through these halls lined with opulence. Massive aquariums flank either side of a pristine lobby, their glass walls intact, exotic fish floating in murky water. The juxtaposition is almost too much to process. A battered soldier, burnt and bloodied, limping through Dubai's untouched heart while the rest of the city rots outside. And then movement. You can see figures in the shadows ahead. 8 men in tattered uniforms, face gaunt and eyes hollow. The last remnants of the damned 33rd. They don't raise their weapons. Instead, the leader offers surrender. 8 hands raise in unison, snapping to 8 foreheads in perfect synchronicity. A final salute, less defiance than resignation. The defeated honoring their new commander. The squad leader speaks, voice flat with exhaustion. They're all that remains of the 33rd. They surrender. Dubai belongs to Walker now. He pauses, staring at the broken men. Once proud soldiers, now hollowed out by months of horror, clinging to whatever scraps of duty remain. Their eyes don't hold fear or hatred, only relief. At last, someone stronger than their ghosts has come to take the burden from them. Walker growls, asking where Conrad is, his voice ragged and inhumane. The leader answers that he's upstairs, where he's always been. The elevator groans to life, cables straining as it carries Walker upward through the tower's spine. From hidden speakers, Conrad's voice crackles softly, taunting him with quiet venom. He congratulates Walker on annihilating the 33rd. He asks if this endless march of blood and ruin, feels like heroism. The penthouse door is ajar. Inside, an artist's studio sprawls like a mausoleum. In the center of the room stands a figure, bent over an easel, adding the final touches to his masterpiece. Without looking up, Conrad speaks, his voice heavy with resignation. He can never outrun what happened here. It destroyed him. Now the painting is finished. He hopes Walker appreciates it. Walker's gaze fixes on the canvas, the gate. 47 civilians burned alive under his command. His stomach churns. He demands to know what's happening. Conrad steps back, inviting him to see clearly for the first time. The pain in Walker's skull throbs like a drumbeat. He lashes out, accusing Conrad of causing all this. But Conrad corrects him. This was Walker's doing. His orders killed 47 innocents. Someone has to answer for those crimes. Who will it be? Walker follows him onto the balcony. Dubai stretches out below, a broken city suffocating under smoke and sand. In a chair, a figure sits motionless, staring across the wasteland. Walker circles slowly, then spins the chair around. Conrad's corpse slumps forward, mummified in his dress uniform, pistol still in hand, a ragged hole in his skull. He's been dead for weeks. The stench of decay hangs in the warm air, mixing with the acrid tang of burning oil. A voice cuts through the silence. The Conrad that Walker created. This phantom tells him the reports of his survival were greatly exaggerated. Walker's hand trembles as he lifts the pistol. His voice cracks. This isn't possible. The hallucination answers calmly. It is possible. Walker stumbles. How? Not how. Why? The memories come flooding back. Radio chatter from a corpse, orders from a dead man, conversations with guilt given shape and voice. None of this would have happened if Walker had just stopped, but he didn't. He kept going. For what? He stammers that they tried to save Conrad. The Phantom smiles bitterly. Walker isn't a savior. His talents lie elsewhere. Visions cascade through his mind. Every choice leading to more death. Every decision justified as necessity. Every act committed to serve a mission that existed only in his fracturing psyche. The hallucination observes. It takes strength to deny what's right in front of you. When truth is unbeatable, you create your own. A mirror stands between them now. Walker stares into his reflection as Conrad's ghost levels a pistol at both of them, two sides of the same broken soul. The Phantom tells him the truth. Walker came here not to save lives, but to feel like something he isn't. A hero. Conrad exists because Walker couldn't face what he'd done. He needed someone to blame, so he pinned it all on a dead man. The voice softens. The lie can't last forever. It raises the pistol, and the countdown begins. Walker insists it's all in his head. The voice counters. Maybe it's all in his head. The numbers tick down. Walker screams that it was all Conrad's fault. The voice tells him to pull the trigger if he truly believes that. His hands are shaking now. His gun rises. He whispers that we never meant to hurt anyone. The ghost observes that no one ever does. The choice solidifies. Accept the truth or preserve the lie forever. At 4, Walker makes his decision. The gunshot rings out. The hallucination crumples, finally silent. Walker stands alone on the balcony, gazing out over the wreckage. For the first time in days, he feels complete. 3 weeks later, the sun burns low over Dubai's carcass, painting the sand with long, bloody shadows. Walker waits on the steps of the tower, Conrad's uniform draped across his frame like it belongs there. The AA-12 rests across his knees, its weight as familiar as his own heartbeat. The city whispers around him, memories of 47 burned alive, Adams dying in a haze of gunfire, Lugo's body swinging from a rope. The voices no longer pierce him, they're part of the silence now. On the horizon, a dust cloud rises. The sound of engines cuts through the heat haze. 2 Humvees crawl over the ridge, their American flags snapping sharp in the wind. Walker rises. His movement is slow, deliberate. The uniform settles on his shoulders like a crown of thorns. Burns and wounds mar his face, but his posture carries the calm authority of a man who has embraced the abyss. The vehicles stop. Doors slam. Soldiers step cautiously onto the sand, forming a loose semicircle. Their weapons are raised, but not quite aimed. These are men on edge, unsure if they've arrived in time for a rescue or something else. Their leader steps forward, voice tight but steady, asking Walker to lower his weapon. Walker studies them, silent. He sees in them the people they used to be, hopeful, naive, and broken. The AA-12 shifts slightly in his grip. The soldiers tense, muttering amongst themselves. They don't understand. They still believe there's something left here to save. Walker's movements are slow, almost graceful. The shotgun rises. The first blast tears through the silence. The firefight is short, precise. Muzzle flashes strobe across the desert like the last sparks of dying stars. Walker moves with the ease of inevitability, cutting through their formation as if this was always how it had to end. When the noises fade, the desert holds its breath. Bodies lie sprawled in the sand. Engines hiss as they cool. The flags droop, streaked red with blood. Walker kneels beside the squad leader, watching the life drain from his eyes. The man clutches his radio like a lifeline, whispering words too faint to hear. Walker takes the device from him, gripping it tight in his burned fingers. Static crackles on the line. Distant voices calling for updates, for survivors, for hope. He presses the button. His voice is calm now, steady.
Gentlemen, welcome to Dubai.
The radio dies. The world goes silent. And Walker stays there, sitting on the steps like a king atop a throne of bones, waiting for the next group of heroes, brave or foolish enough, to come searching for salvation in the place where salvation no longer exists. Above, vultures circle lazily against the blood-colored sky. Spec Ops: The Line doesn't break you by accident. It breaks you systematically, using every tool in the military shooter playbook against you. The genius of its design lies not in subverting the game's mechanics, but in weaponizing them. For the first few hours, it feels like coming home. The cover system works exactly like Gears of War. The squad commands echo Rainbow Six. The weapon handling mirrors Call of Duty down to the reload animations. Your muscle memory kicks in immediately. Duck behind cover, pop up, shoot, advance. You've done this dance 1,000 times before, but that familiarity is the trap. Every mechanic you've learned to trust becomes a lie told with surgical precision. The contextual kill prompts that once made you feel like a badass now force you to watch Walker drive his boot into a man's skull with unnecessary brutality. The squad commands that used to coordinate tactical strikes now bark orders like light 'em up as you mow down American soldiers. Even the loading screens become a mirror held up to your face. Early on, they offer helpful tips. aim for the hero to conserve ammunition. But by the end, they're accusations. Do you feel like a hero yet? How many Americans have you killed today? This is all your fault. The game knows exactly what you've done. More importantly, it knows you chose to keep doing it. And that's where the game's most brilliant cruelty reveals itself, making player agency and narrative complicity the same thing. Walker's descent into madness mirrors something far more uncomfortable: your own willingness to continue playing. At any point, you could have stopped, put down the controller, walked away, but you didn't. Neither did Walker. Walker pushes forward because he believes he's saving people. You push forward because you want to see how the story ends. Both justifications lead to the same place: a pile of corpses and the hollow realization that you were never the hero of this story. The white phosphorus crystallizes this perfectly. The game presents it as a tactical choice. Enemies are entrenched, you need to clear them out. Here's a tool that will do the job efficiently. The mechanics themselves are also familiar. Select target, fire weapon, watch explosion. You've done this exact thing in dozens of other games, but then you walk through the aftermath. You see the melted faces, the charred mother clutching her baby, the soldier who asks with his dying breath, why? And you realize the game didn't force you to use white phosphorus. It just made it the path of least resistance, the most effective solution, the easiest way forward. Just like every other military shooter had trained you to think, the horror isn't that you used a terrible weapon. The horror is how naturally you reach for it, how little you questioned the choice, how familiar the mechanics felt even as they facilitated an atrocity. During focus testing, players literally paused the game and left the room when they saw what they had done. They couldn't watch the aftermath of their choices. But here's the crucial detail. They came back, they sat down, picked up the controller, and kept playing. Because they needed to know how it ended. Because the story wasn't complete. Because walking away would mean admitting that they'd rather not know what kind of person they really were. But there's an even darker reading of Walker's story. One that transforms every moment of the game into something more horrifying than madness. Death. According to lead writer Walt Williams, Walker died in that helicopter crash. Everything that follows, the executions, the conversations with Conrad, is purgatory. Walker's final moments stretched into eternity, his broken mind constructing elaborate justifications for the unjustifiable, whilst his soul burns in the desert he helped create. The visual language supports this interpretation through a simple but devastating trick. Normal transitions fade to black, but when Walker is hallucinating or lying to himself, they fade to white. The entire epilogue, where Walker potentially goes home, where he might find redemption, fades to white. Even if you reject the death theory, the game is telling you that his survival is just another delusion. This reading transforms every choice into a different kind of horror. You're not watching a man descend into madness. You're watching a dead man's soul construct elaborate fantasies to avoid confronting what he truly was. Dubai erupts in red flame immediately after the crash, and the dead begin shambling towards Walker. His first experience after surviving is the most spectacular hallucination of all. Think about the impossibilities that surround Walker's journey. How does he survive injuries that would kill ordinary men? How does he keep fighting with wounds that should have incapacitated him hours ago? How does he maintain the stamina to wage a one-man war against an entire battalion? The answer might be simple. He doesn't. Dead men feel no pain. Dead men don't tire. Dead men can keep fighting long after their bodies should have given up. The comrade on the radio becomes not just Walker's guilt, but his eternal punishment. A voice that will never stop asking the questions he can never answer. The white phosphorus scene becomes not a moment of choice, but a recreation of hell, played out endlessly until Walker accepts what he's become. In this interpretation, every ending is the same ending. Walker can't go home because he's already dead. He can't find redemption because this is his punishment. He can't escape Dubai because Dubai is inside him now, a wasteland of his own making, that he'll wander forever, always believing he's the hero, always discovering he's the monster. The desert becomes his tomb, and every grain of sand is a life he took, a choice he made, a moment he could have turned back, but didn't. The city buried in dunes isn't just a setting, it's a metaphor for a soul buried under the weight of its own sins, forever digging deeper instead of crumbling towards the light. Yet perhaps the most devastating aspect of the game emerges in its final revelation, that Conrad has been dead the entire time, that Walker has been talking to his own guilt. This offers multiple interpretations, all equally damning, but understanding them requires understanding what Conrad represents. Not just Walker's guilt, but the player's need for someone else to blame. Walker might accept responsibility for his actions, understanding that every choice was his, every death his fault, every atrocity flowed from his need to be a hero. This is the honest ending, where he faces the truth of what he's become. But even this acceptance comes with a cost. Acknowledging that he was never forced to do any of it, that every step deeper into hell was voluntary. Alternatively, Walker might refuse responsibility, projecting his guilt onto a convenient scapegoat. Conrad becomes the villain Walker needs him to be. The mastermind, the corrupted colonel, the man who made him do these terrible things. This is the denial ending, where he preserves his sense of righteousness by externalizing his sins. It's the most human response, and perhaps the most damning. But there's a third interpretation, more subtle and more disturbing. Walker does both simultaneously. Consciously, he knows the truth. He understands that Conrad is dead, that the voice on the radio was his own fractured psyche, that every order he followed came from inside his own head. But subconsciously, he needs the lie. He needs Conrad to be real, to be evil, to be responsible. Because accepting full responsibility for what he's done would shatter what's left of his sanity. So he kills his hallucination and takes on Conrad's role. He becomes the voice on the radio for the next group of soldiers who stumble into Dubai thinking they're heroes. The cycle perpetuates itself because the alternative, admitting that heroes don't exist, that good intentions guarantee nothing, that the line between salvation and damnation is thinner than cigarette paper, is unbearable. But here's the game's most vicious trick. You, the player, are going through the exact same process as Walker. You're looking for someone to blame for what you've done. Maybe it's the game designers who forced you to use white phosphorus. Maybe it's the military-industrial complex that creates these weapons. Maybe it's society for glorifying war. Maybe it's Walker himself for being weak enough to break. Anyone but you. Anyone but the person who picked up the controller, loaded the game, and chose to keep playing even when it became clear that continuing meant participating in atrocities. The Conrad paradox isn't just about Walker's relationship with his guilt. It's about your relationship with yours. The game doesn't just ask whether Walker is responsible for his actions. It asks whether you're responsible for yours. And it offers you the same escape routes it offers Walker. Blame someone else, blame the system, blame the circumstances, or face the mirror. Gentlemen, welcome to Dubai, Walker tells the rescue team at the end. It's not a greeting, it's an invitation to join him in hell. Because misery loves company, and guilt demands witnesses. Because someone has to carry the weight of what's happened here. And Walker has learned that the burden is lighter when it's shared. Your conscious mind tells you, I survived, I completed the mission, I did what I had to do. But your unconscious mind knows the truth. You're not the hero, you're not even the villain. You're just another excuse, another voice on the radio, another Conrad waiting to corrupt the next player who thinks they can walk through hell and come out clean. The game doesn't end with redemption or damnation. It ends with replication. The monster creates another monster who will create another monster, until the desert is full of voices calling themselves heroes and the bodies pile high enough to block out the sun. Do you feel like a hero yet? You shouldn't. None of us should. Because heroes, it turns out, are just monsters with better marketing. I finished Spec Ops: The Line on a Tuesday night several years ago. The credits rolled, the screen went black, and I sat in the dark for 20 minutes, controller still in my hands, trying to process what had just happened to me. Not to Walker, to me. I'd killed hundreds of people across dozens of military shooters. I'd committed virtual war crimes in the name of freedom, democracy, and the almighty high score. I'd walked through digital graveyards with a spring in my step and a song in my heart, collecting achievements like merit badges for murder. But this time felt different. This time the bodies wouldn't disappear when I turned off the console. This time the weight of my choices followed me into the real world, a persistent ache that no amount of rationalization could numb. The game had done something unforgivable. It had made me see myself clearly. For years I'd been telling myself that violence in games was harmless, just pixels on a screen, just mechanics in a system, just entertainment for the masses. I'd built elaborate philosophical frameworks to justify my love of virtual carnage, convincing myself that shooting digital people said nothing about who I was as a person. Spec Ops didn't argue with those frameworks. It didn't need to. It simply held up a mirror and asked one question. If this is all just harmless fun, why do you feel so terrible about it? The answer, of course, is that it was never harmless. Every time I'd chosen to continue playing instead of walking away, I'd been making a choice about the kind of person I wanted to be. Every time I'd rationalized virtual violence as just a game, I'd been building the mental infrastructure that would one day allow me to rationalize real violence as just necessary. The line between heroism and monstrosity isn't drawn by circumstances or intentions or even consequences. It's drawn by the stories we tell ourselves about our actions. And for years, I'd been telling myself the story of the hero, even as I left a trail of bodies in my wake. Walker's story doesn't end with redemption or damnation. It ends with a choice. Continue the cycle or break it. Become another Conrad, feeding lies to the next generation of would-be heroes. Or find the courage to admit that heroes don't exist. That good people sometimes do terrible things. That the capacity for evil lies inside all of us, waiting for the right justification to reveal itself. The most honest interpretation of Spec Ops isn't that Walker is a monster. It's that Walker is us. A person who started with good intentions and found himself capable of things he never imagined. A person who told himself stories to avoid confronting uncomfortable truths. A person who believed that wanting to help was the same thing as actually helping. We are all walking for our own Dubai, making choices that seem reasonable in the moment but leave us covered in ash and regret. We are all listening to voices on the radio that tell us we're heroes, even as the evidence of our monstrosity piles up around us. We are all one bad day, one impossible choice, one moment of weakness away from becoming the very thing we swore we'd never be. The game's final image isn't Walker standing in a penthouse, gun in hand, choosing between suicide and murder. It's you, sitting in front of your screen, controller in hand, choosing between honesty and denial. Walker's story is finished. Yours is still being written. The question isn't whether Walker deserves forgiveness. The question is whether you deserve it. Whether you can look at the person you've become, shaped by years of consequence-free violence, trained to see killing as problem-solving, conditioned to believe that good intentions justify any means, and still call yourself a hero. Maybe you can. Maybe you've found a way to reconcile the contradictions, to live with the weight of what virtual violence represents, to sleep peacefully knowing that somewhere inside you lives the capacity for terrible things. Or maybe, like Walker, you are still wandering in the desert, looking for someone to blame for the choices you've made, still listening to voices on the radio that tell you you're the good guy, still believing that the next mission will be the one that finally makes you feel like a hero. But the mirror doesn't lie, and in its reflection, you don't see Walker's bloodied face or Conrad's knowing smile. You see yourself, and maybe for the first time you understand what you're really looking at. The game ends where it began, with a question that has no good answer. Do you feel like a hero yet? You shouldn't, but you do. And that's the most terrifying truth of all. Okay, well, thank you for watching the video, and as earlier, make sure to check out mantamask.com and use code NOTSABER for 10% at checkout. Any mask you get does support the channel directly, so if that sounds interesting to you at all, or if the mask itself sounds interesting, please make sure to check it out. I hope you enjoyed this video. I wanted to do a video on Spec Ops for a while, but I just couldn't find the time, or, like, fit it in, but I think this works considering the whole, you're a monster theme. I don't really think the game's... Well, the game is quite deep. I don't actually think it really applies that much to the stuff I said. And I know that the retelling wasn't exactly, like, beat by beat of what happened, but it's more a cinematic retelling, if you get what I mean. Because, honestly, if you just want a beat by beat straight recap, there's so many of them already on YouTube. You know, you don't need me. But, yeah, as always, I'd like to thank the channel members and the Patreons. That, of course, being... The Milkman, Flapjack, Camo Chameleon, Copper Boltwire, Rasalki Ryler, Will Provine, Reese Lunn, Aroxano, Vinicus Franca, A Brick Wall, Ash Crowing, Adrian Nerium, Crit Croc, Myhara Project, Proxy, and Icebear. Thank you all so much for the support. Genuinely means the world to me. But yeah, hope you did enjoy. Let me know down below what you want me to see in the future. And channel's coming up to 1 year. Big 1-0. Well, no, big 1. So... I will think I'll have a special personal video out then. It'll still be a normal video, like a thing, but it might be a bit different. I think they're doing like Little Big Planet or something, but I don't know, because the game means a lot, or some other series that meant a lot to me as a growing up, just because, you know, might as well. It's a birthday celebration. Woo! But yeah, thank you all so much for watching. Let me know down below if there's any games you want me to cover, and I will maybe look at it. And I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye. Make sure to check out Manta Sleep, please. Thank you.